Welcome to 28 Storms. This is your tropical weather update for Saturday, July 9th. There is nothing brewing in the short term across the Atlantic Basin or the Eastern Pacific. We still have Tropical Storm Calvin out there, but it's quickly on its way out and will likely dissipate within the next 24 hours. So much of this video will show the medium range forecast models to see where and when the next storm may develop. This was the early morning surface plot from the Tropical Analysis Forecast branch. As you can see, Calvin was still a hurricane at the time of this update, but elsewhere there's really not a whole lot on the chart. We do have a couple tropical waves traversing the central and eastern Caribbean, and we also have a very weak tropical wave approaching 40 degrees west, but once again, none of these waves are going to do anything within the next 2 to 3 days. Here is a quick look at Tropical Storm Calvin, or what's left of it. As you can see, this is a very dramatic change from what we saw just 24 hours ago when we were looking at a ragged eye wall-like feature beginning to develop on visible imagery along with the presence of an eye on microwave satellite. And this just goes to show you that even hurricanes can fall apart within only one day as soon as they move into a wall of unfavorable atmospheric conditions, including westerly wind shear, dry air, and cooler sea surface temperatures. And there are no other disturbances in the eastern Pacific at this time. Switching over to the Atlantic Basin, we do see some convection to the east of the Yucatan Peninsula. This is spreading westward and will increase the rainfall during the late evening hours here across much of Cozumel, Cancun, and other portions of the peninsula. This is going to continue spreading westward into the Bay of Campeche and western Gulf of Mexico, but no development is expected due to the presence of that persistent upper level low that's now moving into the upper Texas coast, and just to the east and south we have a lot of wind shear, so conditions are not favorable for development. And conditions remain unfavorable across much of the Caribbean and western Atlantic due to the presence of the tropical upper tropospheric trough that's draped across much of the region. Now, interestingly enough, though, we still have a couple of those tropical waves that you saw on the surface chart, and even though you can't see them very well on satellite, they are slowly moving westward across the southern Caribbean. And the models continue to lower the pressures once again, even more so over Central America, and some of the models would more than likely be showing some development near the Bay of Campeche, but they're focusing much of the broad area of low pressure over land, thus the reason why none of them are very aggressive on any type of organization over the next week. And here's a look at the central and eastern Atlantic just to show you that nothing is going on out here. The intertropical convergence zone is suppressed well to the south due to the strength of the Atlantic subtropical ridge right now. We do have a few strong clusters of convection that's about to exit the coast of Africa, but we'll see how well these hold up once they reach the open waters. So far, these tropical waves have quickly dissipated as soon as they've made it south of the Cape Verde Islands, which is climatologically typical for this time of the year. We usually don't see a strong ramp up in activity off the coast of Africa until August. We thought that maybe this year we could see a bit above average activity out here as early as mid-July, but so far we've been lucking out, and the models are not showing anything off the coast of Africa, at least throughout the current period. This is a look at the low-level steering, and of course anything that's currently over the central Caribbean, like those aforementioned tropical waves, are going to continue to be pushed westward into Central America underneath the strong presence of the subtropical ridge that extends all the way into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. If the current pattern were to persist, then there would be some chance of this moving into the Gulf or Bay of Campeche, but the models are keeping the ridging really strong here in medium range, but we'll take a look in just a moment. And this is just another look at the wind shear analysis. Much of the Gulf, Caribbean, and West Atlantic are unfavorable due to the presence of the troughs that we saw on water vapor imagery, but as you can see, much of the deep tropical Atlantic is actually experiencing below average wind shear right now. It's just a matter of getting a few strong tropical waves into that region and having that subtropical ridge weaken a little bit to lift the intertropical convergence zone northward. One parameter that also led us to believe that things could get going no later than mid-July were the MJO forecasts. This is the latest GFS ensemble, and this has been the trend for the past week to 10 days. Every single GFS ensemble member solution has continued to indicate that the MJO would spread into the octants 1 and 2, which are very favorable for tropical cyclone development in the Atlantic, and it just continues to be delayed day after day, which just goes to show you how much we should actually rely on the MJO forecasts. I suppose there's still a chance that we get deep into octants 1 and 2 as the models are advertising, but it would be nice to gain some confidence with this actually beginning to happen instead of it just being delayed day after day. We're now looking at the latest 12Z CMC forecast, and you can see the tropical wave spreads into Central America, and by day 6 we see a very broad area of low pressure across much of Central America. And as I alluded to earlier, if this model were to push this area of low pressure just a bit more toward the north or toward the south, then we could have favorable conditions on either side of Mexico right here to possibly spin up a tropical cyclone. This graphic shows you a little bit better as to what is expected to happen. That tropical wave is expected to continue moving westward from the northern half of the South American coast, and it's going to help bring this monsoon trough and lift it northward over time up the wave axis, and then by day 6 we see it sitting here over much of Central America. Once we get into the medium range, it's hard to get into specifics, but the GFS is in agreement with the Canadian with at least lowering the surface pressures, and this particular GFS goes out through day 7, and we see that in fact by day 7 it also begins to lift a vorticity max out of the far northeast Pacific, and it does lift it into the southwest Caribbean. If that were to verify, then we could have something cooking down here by day 7, but again, that's really far out. Here's the 850 millibar vorticity of this GFS model run, and you can see at the very end we begin to see an increase in low-level vorticity here. This is 168 hours out, but just to the east of Honduras we have a developing low-pressure center. This is the graphical surface representation of the GFS on the NCEP website for day 7, and there's a good reason to be interested in what's going on the models here around Central America. This is definitely a suspect area to watch if this solution were to verify, and we're now getting into voodoo land, as James Spann up in northern Alabama likes to say when we look at models this far out, and deservedly so. But as you can see, it lifts it more toward the north over the next 10 to 12 days. So we're going to be looking at a lot of disturbed weather in this region, and you never know, this is getting more into mid-July here, so we could easily see some type of tropical cyclone development as long as we get low pressure over open waters. We're now looking at the European forecast, and it's also not showing anything of any significance, but if we look toward around day 5, day 6, day 7, it's very similar to the GFS and Canadian. If anything, it just focuses the energy a bit more toward the west and south, and if anything, that would increase the chance of development in the eastern Pacific side of Mexico. But once again, just like all the other models, this will be the spot to watch here. A lot of lowering of surface pressures with that monsoon trough possibly lifting north, so that's your area to focus on. So that sums up your tropical weather update for this Saturday. Check again tomorrow for another update.